Hello and welcome to Surprising Ethics. This time we ask, is monogamy, that very traditional practice that we all know, morally wrong? Can monogamy be defended as ethical because it's perhaps more practicable or realistic? And does jealousy offer a good defence of monogamy? A very big welcome to Surprising Ethics, where we look at the surprising ways philosophers are trying to upend received wisdom about ethics and politics. I'm your host, William Gilday. I'm a researcher in philosophy at McGill University and the Centre for Research in Ethics. And as this is one of the launch episodes, I thought I'd explain a little bit more about the podcast. So I'll be doing short episodes like this one with the help of audio clips that I'll engage with from philosophers and commentators and others. And I'll be doing longer form episodes interviewing philosophers on their very own surprising ideas and arguments. But each time we'll start with the status quo about some exciting ethical or political topic. We'll then arrive at a conundrum that threatens the status quo, and we'll look at an alternative idea that responds to the conundrum. And each time there will be some kind of surprise, a surprising idea, a surprising argument, something curious, wacky, different, unexpected. And that's the promise of this podcast. Thanks to the Centre for Research in Ethics, an academic research centre based in Montreal, for kindly supporting this podcast. And now it's time for the status quo. So the status quo view is that monogamy is definitely morally okay. Right. The majority view is that it's definitely fine to be in an exclusive two-person relationship. There's just nothing even beginning to be objectionable about that. I think historically the status quo might have also said that monogamy is the only morally acceptable relationship structure. I think it's far less clear that today that's the status quo view. Consensual non-monogamy, also known as ethical non-monogamy, has been getting more popular. So ethical non-monogamy involves having a non-exclusive relationship where everyone knows about and agrees to the non-exclusivity of that relationship. This is different from unethical non-monogamy, also known as cheating, and it comes in different forms. So the main forms of ethical non-monogamy are open relationships and polyamory. So Jess and Jennifer, say, are in a open relationship if they agree that each of them can have sex with other people outside of the relationship, but not romantic relationships. And polyamory is more liberal than that. So Mark and Maisie are in a polyamorous relationship if they agree that they can have sexual and or romantic relationships with other people. So how many Canadians and Americans do you think have had some personal experience of ethical non-monogamy? Well, according to a 2016 paper in the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy, around 21% of them have. And the authors say that that figure remains constant across factors like age, education, income, religion, region, political affiliation, and race. But whether or not the status quo says that you have to be monogamous to be ethical, it certainly says that it's okay to be monogamous. And here, as ever, are some audio clips to illustrate the status quo, starting with a middle ground roundtable discussion.
My name is Aleftina, but I go by Alia. And honestly, as a person, I don't think I would be able to give someone what they want and what they need in a relationship if I had more than one partner. I just know that I, as a person, wouldn't be able to be in a polyamorous relationship and keep myself happy. So if my partner were to suggest, I would say, I don't think I'm capable of doing that. And I would still love them. I would support them. I would want to be friends with them. I would want them to be as happy as they can be, even if that doesn't involve me in their life.
I don't know, are you not jealous? Because I feel like that's the main reason why I wouldn't be able to do that, is 'cause I don't want to share my partner at all.
Yeah, I don't share. It's like, I am with you and you're with me. And, we're together and we're growing. And if you don't want me anymore and you want to go explore other things, go and explore them, but on your own,
And here's the male mentor, Michael Sartain.
Generally, polyamory is your marriage is somewhat failed, and now we're trying other things. I don't believe polyamory works.
Okay, so now it's time for our conundrum. The conundrum is this. Why would monogamy be morally okay if it involves telling your partner they can't do a whole range of things? Right. In many other areas of life in our relationship, we don't tell our partners not to do a whole load of things and attach penalties to their non-compliance. So in the realm of careers, we tend not to tell our partners you have to have this career and not that career. And we certainly don't attach penalties to their non-compliance. And so what, if anything, would be able to justify telling our partners that they can't do a whole bunch of things? What could justify the restriction that monogamy involves? Okay, here's a surprising theory that responds to the conundrum. So in a pair of journal articles, the philosopher Harry Chalmers argues against monogamy, and he asks us to imagine something like the following situation. So imagine that your best friend sat you down and said, look, we're such good friends, and I really don't want you to have any other friends. I think we should be exclusive friends, and that will really cement and protect our wonderful friendship. And you asked your friend, okay, but what will happen if I do have other friends anyway? And they say, well, I'm really sorry, but I think it'll be over. I take it you'd be pretty shocked, alarmed, confused, right, at this. And more to the point, you'd think it's morally wrong for your friend to try to impose a restriction like that on your life, even if they believe they're doing it for the sake of the friendship. So Chalmers argues that romantic partners who make the analogous request that their other half not have any other romantic or sexual partners are acting in a similarly objectionable way. He thinks that monogamy is like telling your friends not to have any other friends. It's an unjustified restriction of their freedom and on the goods in life to which they have access. Chalmers thinks that monogamous people tell others what to do and are ready to back up their threats in ways that could really harm their partner, including typically the termination of the relationship. So Chalmers argues that monogamy is morally wrong because the restriction that it involves on other people's lives can't be justified. And that's quite a surprising view, right? So most people in most cultures for most of history, I take it, have been monogamous, at least in recent times. And Chalmers is here producing quite an interesting, powerful argument according to which monogamy is not only not the only way to go, it's morally wrong and we shouldn't be monogamous. I mean, even the biggest proponents of ethical non-monogamy normally don't go that far, right? They're normally keen to advance ethical non-monogamy as a valid way to live. They're keen to increase people's understanding of other ways of doing things. They're keen to reduce the prejudice or stigma or suspicion attached to ethical non-monogamy. This is quite another claim, right? So Chalmers points out that if monogamy is going to emerge as morally justified, despite this challenge to its defensibility, we need to find differences between the two cases, between monogamy and exclusivity demands in friendships. Differences that vindicate monogamy without implying that it's fine for your friend to tell you not to have any other friends on pain of terminating that friendship. So in other words, if we're not able to tell our friends not to have other friends, why should we be able to tell our partners not to have other partners? And Chalmers goes on in the papers to explore possible differences between the two cases. But before we get into that, there's a kind of seemingly obvious response here that maybe we should start with. So the obvious response says, look, what if two people in a couple agree to monogamy? Presumably in the story about you and your bestie, who says no more mates, you don't really agree to having no other friends. But with a romantic partner that you have or had, presumably you agreed to monogamy, explicitly or tacitly. But the response here is to ask, well, why did you agree to it? You may have agreed in some way to monogamy, but only because the threat was on the table. Do this or there'll be consequences. If you stray, it's over. And that requires justification. And someone agreeing out of fear or out of not really knowing that there's a viable alternative relationship structure doesn't really justify monogamy, or at least not obviously. But here's another kind of immediate response. You might think, well, fine, some people are cajoled into monogamy, but others simply have no interest in outside partners, right? That they genuinely don't care. They genuinely are happy fully to be monogamous, even with no threat on the table. So isn't it okay to be monogamous in those cases? Well, I think this raises a question about what monogamy is. So if two people in a relationship never sleep with anyone else or have relationships with anyone else simply because they never happen to want to, the thought never occurs to them, then that would, of course, not be wrong. But Chalmers argues that monogamy isn't the accidental fact of not wanting other partners. It's an arrangement. It's a restriction that we impose on each other, that we hold each other to. So the question is whether expecting our partner not to have any further partners and being ready to attach penalties to their non-compliance is justified. Okay, but here come the defences of monogamy, and in this episode we'll explore two. So the first is the practicality defence of monogamy, and it goes like this. We have limited time and energy as finite beings, right? And relationships call for a lot of time and a lot of energy. And so being monogamous is a way to ensure that we don't overcommit, that we don't end up failing to do what we ought to do, that we don't abandon our partner in their time of need or fail to pay adequate attention to their thoughts or worries, fail to support them in their projects. But Chalmers' response is that that argument also seems to imply a restriction on other uses of time and energy outside a relationship. The argument suggests that it's morally wrong to have significant hobbies like gardening or going to the gym, or that it's morally wrong to have a demanding career like being a lawyer, if that would risk taking a lot of time away from our relationships. But that would be a strange implication, right? We are allowed to have hobbies. We are allowed to have demanding careers. Our partners can't rule those things out, even though we have limited time and energy, and even though our hobbies and our careers compete with our relationships for that time and energy. So given that we are allowed to have hobbies, Chalmers then says, well, why not replace a hobby with a second sexual or romantic partner? Why can't someone say, you know what, I'm going to give up gardening and have a friend with benefits? Nothing in the practicality defence seems to speak against that, because the practicality defence is just concerned with saying, be careful how you manage your time and energy so that your partner doesn't suffer. Okay, but here's an improved version of the practicality defence that Chalmers considers. On this argument for monogamy, it's not just our time and energy that's at issue, but our emotional resources. On this view, romantic relationships are especially emotionally draining, and that is why we can only have one. Right, to have a relationship, you have to become wrapped up in the world of the other person. You have to be able to drop everything and help them if need be. And this all takes emotional resources. But Chalmers points out that not all forms of non-monogamy even allow for other romantic relationships. Right? Some of them, open relationships, only allow for sexual liaisons outside the relationships. And these sexual encounters don't seem especially emotionally taxing. They might indeed be the opposite. Now, the proponent of monogamy might come back and say, well, that's all very well, but sexual relationships risk turning into something much more demanding. They risk turning into romantic relationships. And that may become a problem for the existing bond. But Chalmers here makes an interesting point. He asks, why do we think of romantic relationships as so especially draining? Maybe it's precisely because we're operating with a monogamous mindset. where the romantic idea is that your partner is your everything in terms of your personal needs. They're your friend, they're your confidant, they're your sexual everything, they're your lifelong co-traveller in work, in travel, in holidays, in daily dinners, in crying sessions, the lot. Maybe romantic relationships don't need to be or shouldn't be like that, and maybe we should reduce the pressure we place on our romantic partners. Chalmers says that in the case of our friends, we don't put everything on them. You might have a football pal who can be relied on to go to the match with you, and you might have an emotional pal who you can discuss your crises with. And these friends can take on limited, specialised roles. Why shouldn't it be the same with our partners? Asks Chalmers. So at this point we might think, so much for the practicality defence, it wasn't really hitting the nail on the head anyway. And so we're still in search of a defence of monogamy. We haven't yet found a good reply to the objection that to be monogamous is to impose unjustified restrictions on our partners' lives. So let's now turn to your classic defence of monogamy, jealousy. According to the jealousy defence of monogamy, jealousy is an extremely difficult emotion to manage. Jealousy can be very damaging for our sense of comfort and happiness in life, and jealousy can be very corrosive. And the solution is monogamy. If we can just agree not to have other partners, we can much more easily rest assured that we will not be abandoned for someone else. Non-monogamy is, on this view, generally just too difficult emotionally to embrace, and so monogamy is morally justified on these grounds. This seems to be a very common view and is expressed by one roundtable participant.
And to me, that jealousy is just rooted in the fact that you're completely intimate, you've made a commitment to each other, and this is the person that is basically like your second half. Having that jealousy for your significant other is beautiful in a way.
Okay, so what does Chalmers have to say about all that? He says, look, monogamy isn't the remedy for jealousy that we think it is. It was well known that monogamy doesn't end jealousy, and the popularity of novels and films that explore jealousy in romantic relationships attests to how common it is to feel jealous, even within the boundaries of a monogamous relationship. Chalmers argues that if we seek refuge from jealousy in monogamy, we fail to confront the feelings head on. We seek to run away from the triggers of jealousy rather than confront the feelings. And as any good psychologist would tell you, that tends not to be the best solution. So here's a personal aside. I used to be scared of flying. So I began by just trying not to fly. And that didn't really work. My fingers were sweating at the keyboard when I was booking a flight for like 7 months out. A flight that I couldn't really avoid taking. And it wasn't a good strategy. What got me over it was confronting it head on, learning how planes fly, learning why I felt that way, learning how I could more healthily respond. So that point from Chalmers does seem pretty persuasive. And then Chalmers makes an even stronger claim. Monogamy is not only not the solution to jealousy, it actually perpetuates it. We're forcing our partners to choose us and no other. And that's what creates the worry that we're not good enough, that we're not going to be the best choice for long, that we're going to lose that competition, in inverted commas, to someone else. And even if we happen to be the best option for our partners now, as soon as that new guy turns up at work, we're toast. So Chalmers instead recommends that to deal with jealousy, we abandon monogamy and we take other steps. We should address, for example, the false preconceptions that jealousy rests on. For example, we're prone to thinking of a relationship like a receptacle, like a mug that needs to be filled up to the brim with liquid, and that it's our job to fill it. And that if our partner is even interested in someone else, that must mean that we failed to fill the mug, that we've left some portion unfilled. And that's the view expressed by a participant on the roundtable I mentioned.
If my husband said, I found a different person that I want to be with and she's fulfilling a need that you don't or can't, then I'd be like, okay, go be happy with her. It's not natural for me to be like, okay, let's the three of us work this out.
So the view here is that if a relationship is working, there won't be unfulfilled needs. And so it's our job to fill all those needs, to satisfy the various wants and needs of our partners. But that's not how it works with friendships, right? And it might be a false ideal, a kind of punishing benchmark to hold ourselves to. And I think that Chalmers here offers a powerful argument that calls into question monogamy's ability to contain jealousy. But it remains an open question whether monogamy still does a better job at dealing with jealousy than ethical non-monogamy. And Chalmers has more to say on that question. Chalmers says, look, in non-monogamy, we don't need to be scared that our partner will leave us for some other person, because that partner can have us both. But I don't know, I wonder whether it's always so irrational to feel jealous within an ethical non-monogamous relationship. In ethical non-monogamy, we might just have a very closely related fear, right? The fear that our partner will choose someone else as their primary relationship instead of us, that will slowly become replaced by someone else, that will offer too little to retain our partner's top spot, and indeed that very slowly our partner could leave us by simply spending less and less time with us, replying to fewer and fewer texts, treating us more and more as just a friend, and distance themselves emotionally as they move over their emotional entanglement to the other relationship piece by piece. I think Chalmers recognises a kind of similar worry. He says, look, okay, fine. In a non-monogamous relationship, your partner might meet someone else who lives in another country, and they feel they can't really be with both of you, so they move country, and they leave us entirely. And here's his reply. He says, look, there's something morally troubling about hoping that your partner remains ignorant of other options that are better than you, because they're unable to explore those options. He asks whether, above all, we should be concerned to avoid the situation where our partner stays with us only because she's unable to explore other options, and that we should care more about avoiding that scenario than the scenario in which we're dumped. But I find this a bit too self-denying, right? Human beings are social creatures with deep social and emotional needs. And the idea that we should just be happy for our partner to walk away because someone else represents a slightly better option seems to put too little weight on our own needs, our own need for social connection and a proper relationship. If my friend honestly issued Chalmers' response, I might worry about his level of self-suppression or self-denial. Chalmers says that we should be emotionally independent and we should try to feel secure in ourselves. And I think feeling secure in yourself is a laudable aim and a very important one. But I think this is probably to deny that as social creatures, we can't really be fully emotionally independent and we can't really feel secure in ourselves whilst being dumped for someone ostensibly better. Okay, so where does that leave us? We might reject, as I want to, Chalmers' arguments about jealousy in non-monogamy, but Chalmers has argued quite effectively against the idea that monogamy does a good job on jealousy. So what to say? Well, I think the common view that jealousy is a decisive reason for monogamy is definitely a theory in trouble. But it's also a bit TBD whether non-monogamy is or could be a reliable way to go to deal with jealousy. I don't want to settle that issue here. And more broadly, I don't think we can settle the issue here of whether monogamy is, after all, defensible. And there are other arguments that we've not explored. For example, arguments involving minimising the risk of the worst outcome of losing a highly valuable and prized relationship. But rather than go in search of other arguments for monogamy and trying to settle the question, let me end with these observations. So firstly, it's surprising we've even got to this point of seriously discussing whether monogamy is morally permissible at all. The more normal conversation concerns whether non-monogamous structures are morally permissible, minimally sensible, or hopelessly deluded, or evidence of some unfortunate mindset. And I think philosophers like Chalmers are moving us away from those arguments and those questions towards a very interesting question about the restrictions that we can impose. Secondly, even if we can salvage monogamy as a permissible option, I think thinking through the issues might help us be monogamous for the right reasons, rather than unthinkingly or because it's the norm or because it's presented as right for practically everyone, or loving, romantic, and beyond reproach. I think this emerging area of the philosophy of monogamy and non-monogamy helps us to see that romance is still partly the realm of the rational and of ethical thinking. It's not just, I feel this way and so that's the final word. There are questions to be asked here of the way that we've been having relationships for the last hundreds or thousands of years. Thank you so much for listening to these opening episodes of Surprising Ethics, and I'll see you on October the 1st for my first surprise guest interview.